nerds, what's up? So technically this is gonna be like old news by internet standards by now, but you guys know me, sometimes I just need a second to think about things before I react to them, and I honestly thought I was gonna let this one go, but the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to talk about it. So today we're gonna go over some of the things surrounding Roald Dahl's books and how the UK said they were gonna change them. Now, in case you have no idea what I'm talking about and you missed it, last week, the publishers of Roald Dahl, Penguin Random House, or Puffin Books, released news that they were going to release newly edited versions of all of Roald Dahl's classics that are updated for today's readers, removing insensitive language. They partnered with a company called Inclusive Minds, which goal is to improve children's literature by making it more inclusive and give more authentic representation. Now, full disclosure, I am not super well versed in Roald Dahl's books. They were not like an essential part of my childhood reading journey. I think I read Matilda, but for the most part, just saw the movies of his books. I have read a few in adulthood because my son has that Costco set that I'm pretty sure every kid owns in the United States if you shop at Costco. So I'm sort of familiar, but it's not like I was particularly attached to the original works of Roald Dahl. I think I also read the BFG now that I'm thinking about it. But anyway, not like something I'm super like nostalgic for. So when I first heard this news, I thought, okay, Dahl wrote in the 60s and 70s, there's probably just some racist language and words that they're gonna remove from the books to kind of update them. I assumed the changes would be really small, and I honestly didn't think much of it. Kind of just read the headline and moved on, to be honest. And like, I knew there was probably some argument to be made about whether this was okay or not, but for the most part, I was like, eh. And then I actually read through the changes. So today, we're gonna talk about what the changes were. We're gonna talk about the motivations for those changes and whether or not they were even successful for their end goal. Authors' consent in these changes, the difficult relationship between censorship, protecting vulnerable groups, and erasing history. And maybe we're gonna end talking a little bit about sensitivity readers. Now, this is gonna be a controversial topic, and this is a standard for all my videos, but some videos I feel like I have to say it again. I will not tolerate hate speech towards groups of people. I don't wanna see it in the comment section. I am more than happy if you disagree with me on these topics, but keep it to attacking the arguments, not attacking people or vulnerable groups. We're good there? Okay, then see you after the jump. Okay, I know you guys are eager to probably jump into the changes that were made if you haven't seen them, but I think before we get there, we first need to ask the question, regardless of what the changes are, is it ethical to change past works in this way? Do the ethics of doing this change if the author is alive or dead? Are we attempting to change history, or are we only protecting the next generation from harmful stereotypes and words that we wish were eradicated? And finally, most of all, is this considered censorship? Now, most people, and especially my audience, which is made up of book readers, tend to have a very visceral reaction to the word censorship. We don't like it in any format. We immediately kind of like have that gut reaction of like censorship, bad. And as we know, historically, censorship has mostly been used to support and uphold inequality between groups of people. I don't think that's any surprise. I read several articles that talked about how the upholding of inequality was really what started censorship more than sex or violence. And I don't think that's surprising, especially when we consider book bans today, when we see those as a hot topic. When books are being banned from schools, yes, some of them are banned for violence and sex, but a lot of them are banned for the ideas they hold, and in general tend to be the ideas surrounding vulnerable groups. So this turn of events is a little interesting to me because it is censorship for a different purpose. Instead of censorship of ideas or to uphold inequality, it's a form of censorship to help combat inequality, help combat negative stereotypes. Now, there could be some argument that this isn't censorship in its most technical form, as it is not removing the books, it is not necessarily prohibiting them, but it is suppressing some of the ideas, words, and language which are in the books. And so it's kind of a weird question when we view censorship from a different lens than we normally do. One other thing that also complicates this discussion is that Roald Dahl is no longer living. He is not consenting to the changes made in his book. Now, if an author was alive and willingly and independently changing their books because they felt that they used inappropriate language or things that they no longer believed, I think we'd all feel pretty different about it. It wouldn't feel very much like censorship as someone editing their own works. So I think the fact that Roald Dahl is no longer with us is essential to this argument and discussion and why it may feel like censorship, and also opens this bag of worms of, well, what other books that are very famous may we change to align more with our current thoughts and social patterns? So is positive censorship a thing, or are we just erasing the negative parts of our history that we must remember? For the most part, from all of the research and all of the reading I did, it feels like most people agree that sanitizing the past really isn't helping anybody. The more important thing is that these works aren't read in isolation. If we're gonna read Huckleberry Finn as a part of a class, then we talk about its historical setting, we talk about the time period it was written in, we talk about the author, we talk about why it was written, we talk about the language used and how we feel about that language today. It needs to be a teaching moment. And interestingly enough, this sort of intersex research I have done in the past, totally outside this, for my own children. I have researched a lot about how media influences kids and how I can help with the media they consume and how they react to it. And research article after research article basically said, talk to your kids. If you talk to them about what they're reading and what they're watching, your family culture is going to probably be stronger than the things they are viewing. And it's something I've taken to heart. When we see things in books and in movies, I just talk to my kids about it. How do we feel about that? Is that how we think today? Yada, yada, yada. So I'm not surprised to see that when it comes to classics or books from the past that may have things we definitely don't agree with anymore, racism, especially homophobia, sexism, just talk to our kids about it. Seems to be the more appropriate way to deal with these things rather than trying to erase that it existed. Of course, the risk of that is that a lot of children aren't getting the needed context. That requires them to have educators or parents or family members or friends who are invested in how they are being raised and learning and that culture, and that might just not happen, which is just a risk of that. Ultimately, I fall on the side of erasing history doesn't do anything to change it, and that it probably doesn't make sense to take old books, even if they are still popular today, and sanitize them. That does rely on people talking to their children and talking about these things, and I understand that. But for me, it just doesn't seem worth it. Like, maybe if a book has a couple of words, but it feels like a pretty slippery slope. And there's another issue that we'll talk once we get into the changes about that sort of thing. But overall, I don't think I agree with it. Something I found in my research is people talked a lot about curation over censorship, meaning instead of censoring these books or changing these books, maybe we just offer other books in our curriculum. One article interviewed some Oregonian librarians, and I thought some of the stuff they had to say was really interesting. That's also the approach favored by Allison, who says she worries about librarians who pull books simply because they find them personally offensive. That's a slippery slope, because for some people, an LGBTQ character might be offensive, says Allison. I firmly believe in the freedom to read statement by the American Library Association that even books that are offensive to some people need to be available to students. So from the standpoint of my librarianship and my role in the library, I'm not removing text, but I certainly may not promote them or display them. Still, librarians note that they're trying to strike a delicate balance. Trying not to censor and not to further oppression at the same time is challenging, said Spinks. Torres, who says she would never tell another educator not to teach a certain book, is not in favor of pulling text from the shelves. I believe in a child's right to read what they want, she says. But she says it's important to allow the canon to grow and evolve. I do think teachers need to work together with their students to figure out what do we value as a community? What do we want to learn about? What are we curious about, she says. What text can we bring into our community that will help us grow? So I really liked what they said, and ultimately my thought is changing these works doesn't really help promote better ideas, doesn't really do much for us other than sanitizing history. And maybe if we were worried about it, we should curate other options for our students or children to read that uphold the values we believe, or just talk to our kids about what they're reading. So that teaching context for the books that we show our kids is probably more important than changing them. But I am really curious about your guys' thoughts on this part, so tell me below whether you agree with that or not. Okay, that was long, I apologize. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the Dahl changes and why my mind changed about it so forcefully when I actually read through the changes. Because I do think the actual changes add some interesting elements to the discussion beyond just censorship of old, outdated language. Because remember when I said earlier, I just assumed they were taking out a few phrases or names that were probably racist? Well, they changed a lot more than that, and removed a lot more than that. To the point where some of these changes are pretty baffling and I can't actually come up with a reason for them. I don't have time to go over all the changes in this video, but I will leave the link below to an article that lists all the changes in a very easy to read format. So if you're curious, you can scroll through them. Many of the changes deal with removing any mentions of the word black, white, fat, or gender in cases where it isn't specifically relevant to an individual character. It also focuses on removing sexist notions against women, conflating unattractiveness as a fearful thing, some instances of othering disability, and particularly violent language. So the first thing I want to talk about is some of the sexism things they changed, because I feel like I am a part of that demographic, so I feel a little bit more able to speak on it than some of the other changes. So it's the easiest one for me to talk about. So the first one that people are really talking about is this change where it says, "A witch is always a woman. I do not wish to speak badly about women. Most women are lovely, but the fact remains that all witches are women. There is no such thing as a male witch," which was changed to become simply, "A witch is always a woman. There is no such thing as a male witch." Now I get it. I get the idea of it. Why? But at the same time, there's something about like, well, the humor is removed now. Some women are lovely, I'm sure, but the fact remains they're all witches. It's humorous. Like, I, as a woman, don't read that and go, they're saying that all women are witchy. Like, I get that there's that connotation. I get that we have that problem in society, but it's also supposed to be humorous. So at some point it feels like, okay, that feels like a change that does maybe detract from the whole humor of the book. There was a lot of changes like that. So I'm kind of conflicted. It just doesn't seem necessary. A lot of these changes are not calling a woman ugly or not implying that a woman needs to smell nice. Again, in particular with that smell nice one, it feels a part of the humor. I don't think it's implying all women need to smell nice or whatever it is. Like, I didn't read this book, so I know that's a bad thing, but I feel like I can still even in this small context. Now, this next one is one that actually made me laugh out loud. And this is the change. The original says, "Even if she is working as a cashier in a supermarket or typing letters for a businessman." And that was changed to, "Even if she is working as a top scientist or running a business." Look, I was in STEM. I get it, okay? I get it. I get the idea behind it. We want to talk about women just aren't in these low roles. But my biggest issue with this change is that the writing is just so bad. Even if she is working as a top scientist or running a business, it's like so clunky. I actually laughed out loud. It's just like, if you did it as a man, you wouldn't say even if he is working as a top scientist. Like, it doesn't even sound good switched. It sounds silly. If they really want to change this, why not kind of keep it sort of the same? Like, even if she is working as a cashier or an engineer. Like, that already sounds like a little bit more flowing because they're both more average jobs and you kept one of them. Like, again, how do I explain? It's not that I'm against this. I don't like the insinuation that women can only hold low-level jobs. In the context of this book, is that what the kid is really going to think about it? Probably not. I do feel like as adults, we tend to think kids get different things out of their books than what the kids are actually getting out of them. Others deal with the removal of the word fat or black, white, and red to describe things. So for example, a spider's head is no longer black, a face can no longer turn white, or you cannot turn red with anger. Or, for example, we deal with the complete removal of the word fat, but leave in enormous. I do want to talk about these changes in particular because they actually seem to go against things that I have read. Not to belabor the point, but there was a story I either read in Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria or How to Be an Anti-Racist. I read those really close together, so I can't remember which story this comes from. But they talked about a woman telling the story about her very young daughter, 4 or 5, playing on the playground and saying, "I made a new friend, I love her." And the mom's like, "Oh, which one's your friend?" And she's going through all of these labors, like her dress is this color, her shoes are this color, she's this one. And in the end, the mother realizes it's the only black girl on the playground. And she's so proud of her daughter. She's like, "My daughter doesn't see race. She didn't even notice. Like, this is so great." And what the author posits is research probably shows that the daughter didn't not see race. She already had internalized and learned that she could not say the word black, as if black was a bad word to say. Because often if a kid points out differences, our natural reaction as parents is to hush them. Shh, don't ask that. Why is that woman walking that way? Why is that woman so dark? Shh, don't ask that. instead of just calmly stating what it is. Oh, she has more melanin in her skin. Simple facts. And how we can unconsciously teach children that descriptors are bad. And it talked a little bit about this in also the book Demystifying Disability, which was helpful for me to contextualize some of these changes as well. And so this is where it comes into, is that even accomplishing the goal? Is removing these words, removing racial connotations, or removing racist wording or situations? Or is it not doing anything and maybe even harming what we're talking about? That's what's interesting. And it's the same with the word fat. Fat is a descriptor. And by leaving in enormous, first of all, and the flabs and stuff, we still know these characters are overweight. And removing the word fat doesn't remove the connotation in some of these books. I mean, I don't know about Roald Dahl, but that fat kids are lazy, not smart, not worthy. And let me tell you, I grew up in the 90s, so I've been reading a lot of 90s fantasy books to my son. And the prevalence of that trope of fat kids, bad, lazy, mean, rude, skinny kid, nice, happy, successful hero, it's a lot. I did not realize how much that trope was in there. But removing the word fat from those books wouldn't remove that, right? It doesn't remove any of the negative connotation associated with it. So is it even accomplishing the goal, or is it just removing the word? Like, that's where these changes don't make any sense to me. I don't think they're even accomplishing what they set out to accomplish. Some of these changes also clearly attempt to be more inclusive to disability. Again, I'm not sure how I feel about it. Again, I don't like to be a statement for this. I am not a part of that group, so I don't know. But when I look at some of these changes, you can't go around pulling the hair of every lady you meet, even if she is wearing gloves. You just try it and see what happens. There's a lot of humor in that. This is about witches, I guess, needing to wear wigs. And then the response is, besides, there are plenty of other reasons why women might wear wigs, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Again, it's the language it's replaced with is so clunky. So maybe if you're like, we don't want to stigmatize wearing wigs. Okay. Again, this feels more humorous than stigmatizing, but even if you do, at least replace it with something that's better written than that. Again, a lot of things that I think are supposed to be humorous in these language, saying that your daughter doesn't have hearing organs because she's doing poorly in school, someone claiming they need a walking stick for a different reason. I get it, you don't want kids to feel like their walking stick is bad, but again, I think there's some humor and irreverence here that's purposeful, and I don't necessarily think it stigmatizes. Again, tell me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. Like, for example, there's a lot of descriptions of women being tiny, and one where she needs a stool, and that one really surprised me that they took out the stool needing thing. I'm 5'2", and I have like 5 stools in my house because I can't reach anything without stools. So it was funny to read that as if like we can't say a woman needs a stool when like I have a lot of friends who need stools, and I didn't think it was something that we need to be concerned about. I thought it was an average part of life. So again, it's like I question that. My final category, if you're not sick of talking about these, is just the category of removing violence when it's very silly violence. Now, let me be clear. I am extremely sensitive about violence and what my kids watch. Violence-wise, I think our kids watch way too much violent stuff. But the violence in Roald Dahl's book is not only extremely silly, it also is probably a reason kids like it. Kids like weird stuff. Kids like irreverent stuff. And I think removing that actually in this case maybe removes some of the heart of the books, but also again, the changes are just written so poorly. Will she go pop? Will she explode? Till will she go pop? Hop like a toad. Hop like a toad. And then at the end, just a bunch of changes I didn't understand, which I might put up here on the screen, where I just actually don't understand why they need to be changed. I can understand some of the gender ones, changing mom and dad to parents to be more inclusive. But what about changing all the Oompa Loompas from being men to being little people, which I think actually changes the connotation quite a bit? Okay, we've probably talked about this for too long. Overall, were there some changes that made sense? Yes. I pointed out the more ridiculous ones, the ones that made me laugh, but were there changes that yes, of course there were. The question is though, is it worth it? A lot of the things they changed seem to expressly go against the purpose of changing them or not do anything at all. And so at one point I had to ask, what's the point? So even if we ignore the ethics of censorship or the ethics of changing things like this, even if we ignore that, I don't even think they fulfilled their purpose if they wanted to, which almost makes it worse. I just so wish we knew more about how these changes were made. I am not an expert, so it's hard for me to sit here and say, I guess, my unexpert, just from the stuff I've researched. I wish I knew more about the company. I wish I knew more about the people who were working on this project, because it surprises me. It surprises me how it turned out. And I cannot find a statement from this company. I searched and searched and searched. It's just so buried if it's there. I wish we knew more. So while editing, I actually finally did find commentary from the company, although unfortunately it doesn't actually say much since they said they won't talk about individual projects. I did find it interesting though that they said they were not considered sensitivity readers, which I'm not really sure honestly what the difference is. So if you know, please enlighten me in the comments. But yes, I don't really feel like I know that much more about their role in this project. Because one thing that's important to me, moving on to our next section, is I don't want this to be like a haha, sensitivity reading is bad, it should be gotten rid of, because that's definitely not what I'm trying to say. Just because we've had one or a few really public instances of where sensitivity reading, at least in my opinion, goes really wrong, it's kind of like that survivorship bias where you're never reading or noticing all of the time sensitivity reading went right. At its core, sensitivity reading is just a way, I think, to get better and more representation in our books. Authors are going to be writing about stuff they don't know about in an effort to include more people and make their books and stories more interesting. And we never bat an eye if an author asks a biologist or a scientist or whoever, a geologist, like someone who's an expert in their field to make their book make more sense scientifically, like especially in fantasy and sci-fi. So why would we bat an eye about asking people about characters, about how to properly represent them? It's totally normal and something that's probably very successful most of the time. I mean, isn't there even a joke about how authors are worried they'll be considered criminals because of their search history? Like, research is a natural part of writing a book. So we don't need to have this automatic panic when we're researching the lives of people and how they live. Now, I know a ton of authors do this, but there's a couple of fandoms I'm in so that I know that they're happening and I can use them as examples. One is Brandon Sanderson. I won't say which book it is because I would consider it a spoiler, but one of the acknowledgement pages of his book reads, a special note for this book: we had a group of accessibility and paraplegia experts who gave me a ton of great feedback, leading to not just a better book in their specific area of expertise, but a more engaging and interesting book overall. They include, and then he lists the names of the people that he talked to. And when my favorite podcast, The Adventure Zone, wanted to introduce a transgender character, guess who they talked to? They basically said we wanted to make sure we didn't fall into any pitfalls when we introduced that character. These are positive examples that you probably didn't even know, but it's a very average thing that helps representation a lot. And of course, as also is extremely important in this conversation, groups of people are not homogenous. No single person can be a monolith for the entire group they represent. So having a sensitivity reader doesn't mean it's going to be perfect all the time or that everyone's going to agree with how something's represented. It's just a way, like any research, to make a book more engaging and realistic and hopefully not harmful. Okay. I could honestly go for a lot longer on this topic if I wanted to. But let's kind of boil down what we talked about. Overall, my feelings are that censorship doesn't really make sense in this context, even though we are trying to help inequality instead of further inequality. I think changing history, changing books, isn't going to really do what we think it will. And the more important thing is that we're having conversations with the people in our lives about the media we consume. Editing an author's works when he's dead feels wrong. Make sure when you're aiming to be more inclusive that you're actually accomplishing your goal that you set out for and not just changing things to change. Sensitivity reading is important and we shouldn't throw it out just because there was one pretty public bad experience of it. This is a really complicated topic. I expect a lot of people to disagree in the comments, and I'm kind of interested to hear what you guys have to say because I've thought a lot about it, but I'm not sure my opinion is fully formed even still. I think censorship is a really hot topic and a slippery slope. And when is it suppression? When is rewriting considered censorship? I think it's an interesting topic and we're gonna see it probably more and more. One thing that's really important to note at the end here is the publishing company did come out and say, because it was so much backlash, that they're now gonna be publishing both, at least at the time that I last read, publishing both versions, the classic version and the revised version. And then people can choose what they want to buy. What's important to note here is that I would guess a vast majority, let's throw out a random statistic, 80%, 90% of buyers will not even know this happened. We're all in the book community. We hear stuff like this a lot. General public has no idea. And especially if you're going to go just pick up a book at a bookstore, hey, I remember liking the BFG as a kid, let's pick it up. What will you know the difference between the two versions? You probably won't even be able to tell from the outside unless you were in the know. Does it matter? What book choice would you make? Because then it's a weird choice too. Now that I know, I mean, we already own them, so whatever. I'm not going to rebuy them. We don't like them that much. But now that I know, what choice do I make? The original one or the one, like that ultimately probably doesn't change them enough to matter, but maybe try to take out stuff? It becomes a weird choice. But sorry, I went on a tangent there. Most people aren't going to know. And is that a problem? Food for you guys, food for thought for you guys. You tell me in the comments below if that's a problem. Okay, we made it. We got through this. If you like these kind of deep dives that go into controversial topics in hopefully a more measured way, please like and subscribe. That is the best way to support me. I do a lot of this kind of content. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.